On June 22, 1941, at 3:58 a.m., the silence over the Bug River was shattered by the roar of thousands of artillery shells. Operation Barbarossa had begun. The assault on the Brest Fortress was carried out by units of the German 45th Infantry Division, numbering about 17,000 men, supported by artillery, mortars, and assault detachments. Inside the fortress were between 7,000 and 9,000 Soviet personnel, elements of the 6th and 42nd Rifle Divisions, the 17th NKVD Border Guard Detachment, the 132nd Convoy Battalion, and other units. Many were asleep. Communications were destroyed within the first minutes. Warehouses caught fire. The water supply system was shattered. Command structures were broken apart. The Germans expected to capture the fortress within 8 hours. By dawn, assault groups had crossed the Bug and stormed through breaches in the walls. They anticipated panic. Instead, they were met with heavy fire from windows, basements, and casemates. The fighting immediately turned into close combat. Grenades, machine guns, and gunfire exchanged at only a few meters' distance. The fortress became a labyrinth of firing positions. By noon on June 22nd, the fortress was surrounded. Hundreds of soldiers who were unarmed or cut off were captured. Yet organized pockets of resistance emerged in different sectors, in the citadel, at the Kobrin and Tiraspol fortifications. Leadership was assumed by Major Pyotr Gavrilov, Captain Ivan Zubachoyev, Commissar Yefim Fomin, and Lieutenant Andrei Kishevatov. They acted independently, but with a common goal: to hold their positions at any cost. German reports on the very first day recorded fierce resistance and casualties higher than expected. Artillery fire intensified. Flamethrowers and demolition charges were brought into action. There was almost no water left inside the fortress. At night, soldiers crawled toward the river under machine gun fire to fill helmets with water. Many were killed on the riverbank. On June 23rd and 24th, resistance continued. The Germans were forced to bring in additional forces and heavy guns. Reports noted that separate groups of Soviet soldiers continued to emerge from underground passages and launch counterattacks. The 45th Division lost more than 400 men killed and over 700 wounded in the first days. These were significant numbers for an operation that had been planned as a rapid action. By June 26th, organized defense had broken down into isolated pockets. However, the fighting did not cease. Major Gavrilov held the eastern fort. Kishevatov's border guards fought until their ammunition was exhausted. Fomin was captured and executed as a political officer. The Germans used heavy aerial bombs weighing up to 1,800 kilograms against the fortifications of the eastern fort. Organized resistance lasted about 7 days. Individual groups continued to resist until the end of June, and even until July 23, 1941, when the severely wounded and exhausted Pyotr Gavrilov was captured. About 2,000 members of the garrison were killed, and more than 5,000 were taken prisoner. German documents recorded the exceptional stubbornness of the defenders. In post-war memoirs, some German officers acknowledged the courage of those who defended the fortress and admitted that the resistance at Brest had been unexpected and worthy of respect. The fortress did not alter the strategic course of the campaign. Minsk was captured on June 28th. But in the first hours of the war, the garrison demonstrated that the invasion would not be an easy march. Cut off from supplies and command, the defenders continued to fight as long as they had ammunition and strength. The morning of June 22nd left the garrison with neither time to deploy nor any chance for an organized withdrawal. Within just a few hours after the first strike, the Brest Fortress was split into isolated sectors. Units of the German 45th Infantry Division broke through to the central gates, blocked the bridges, and effectively fragmented the defense into separate pockets. Communication between units was non-existent. Radio stations had been destroyed. Field telephones were silent. Each sector fought on its own. In the citadel, the defense was led by Captain Ivan Zubachov and Commissar Yefim Fomin. They managed to gather groups of soldiers from various units, organize the distribution of ammunition, and establish firing positions in the barracks and basements. Under their leadership, counterattacks were launched that temporarily pushed German assault groups away from the central buildings. Fomin personally took part in the fighting, moving between positions under fire. At the Tiraspol fortification, border guards under the command of Lieutenant Andrei Kizhevatov held their ground. His unit was among the first to come under attack. The border guards took up positions in shattered casemates and opened fire on German groups attempting to secure positions inside the walls. Ammunition was quickly running out. The Germans used flamethrowers, burning out the basements. Despite this, the defense continued as long as the defenders still had cartridges left. At the Kobrin fortification and in the eastern fort, a group led by Major Pyotr Gavrilov was in action. He managed to organize a stable defense using the massive brick walls and internal passageways to advantage. His soldiers carried out sudden strikes against assault detachments, destroying isolated enemy groups. German units were forced to advance slowly, clearing every corridor step by step. By the evening of June 22nd, German command realized that the assault would not be completed quickly. Reports from the 45th Division noted that resistance was continuing in numerous pockets and that the garrison was displaying unexpected resilience. A decision was made to intensify artillery fire and bring in heavy mortars. The bombardment resumed with renewed force. On June 23rd, there was virtually no water left in the fortress. The wounded lay in basements without medical assistance. Nevertheless, individual groups attempted nighttime sorties to the Bug River. These attempts cost many fighters their lives. German machine guns swept the approaches to the water. But without water, resistance was impossible, and men went again. German losses continued to rise. According to the division's war diaries, within the first 3 days of the assault, the number of killed and wounded exceeded 1,000 men. For a formation that was supposed to advance rapidly deep into enemy territory, this was a serious blow to the pace of the operation. On June 24th, the Germans began using heavy aerial bombs against the eastern fort. The strikes destroyed a significant portion of the fortifications. However, even after the bombardment, fighting continued in the ruins. The defenders used the debris as cover, fired from minimal distances, and engaged in hand-to-hand combat. By June 25th, most organized resistance in the central citadel had been suppressed. Many defenders were killed or captured. Commissar Fomin was taken prisoner and soon executed. Captain Zubachiov was also captured, but in the eastern fort, Gavrilov's group continued the defense. German soldiers, according to memoirs of division participants, noted the enemy's persistence. Reports stated that individual Soviet fighters continued to emerge from underground chambers even after a sector had been declared cleared. This caused frustration among the Germans and, at the same time, a recognition of the defenders' resilience. By the end of June, resistance had become sporadic but had not disappeared. The remaining groups acted autonomously, without communication and without hope of relief. They knew the fortress was surrounded, that the front had moved far to the east, yet they continued to fight. By June 26, 1941, the main centers of organized defense in the central part of the Brest Fortress had been suppressed. However, the fighting did not end. The most resilient sector remained the eastern fort, where the defense was led by Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov. By that time, he had several hundred fighters under his command, mainly from the 44th Rifle Regiment and other scattered units that had managed to break through to the fortification during the first days of the assault. The eastern fort had stronger brick walls and a casemate structure, which allowed it to hold out longer. The Germans had already realized that standard assaults by small groups were leading to heavy losses. Therefore, a decision was made to use heavy artillery and aviation. On June 29th, a powerful bombing strike was launched against the fort. According to German records, aerial bombs weighing up to 1,800 kilograms were used. The explosions destroyed ceilings, blocked internal passages, and many defenders were killed under the rubble. Nevertheless, even after the bombardment, fire from the shattered casemates did not cease. German assault groups advanced meter by meter, clearing rooms with grenades and flamethrowers. Gavrilov's fighters moved from one position to another, using smoke, dust, and ruins as cover. Ammunition was almost exhausted. They fired in short bursts, conserving every cartridge. The defenders' situation was becoming critical. There was no water. Food was almost non-existent. The wounded remained without bandages. Yet there was no surrender. German reports recorded that even after the destruction of the fort, individual groups continued to resist. Reports of the 45th Infantry Division noted that the elimination of the garrison required continuous combat operations. On June 30th and July 1st, the eastern fort was finally occupied by German units. Most of the defenders were killed or captured. However, Major Gavrilov himself was not taken prisoner. With a small group, he managed to hide in underground chambers and continued resisting. The Germans conducted search operations, but found only traces of recent presence: spent cartridges, scraps of bandages, inscriptions on the walls. In various parts of the fortress, lone fighters or small groups were still active. They appeared suddenly, opened fire on patrols, and then disappeared into the debris. German soldiers had to maintain reinforced guards even after the official announcement of the end of the assault. This meant that the fortress had not been completely cleared. The resistance that had begun at 3:58 a.m. on June 22nd had already lasted more than a week. For a garrison cut off from communication and supplies, this was an exceptional duration. German command, which had expected to complete the operation within a single day, was forced to commit significant forces and heavy weapons. By mid-July, isolated shots could still be heard inside the fortress. According to German accounts, on July 23, 1941, Pyotr Gavrilov was discovered in one of the ruined casemates. He was severely wounded, exhausted, and barely able to move, yet he still had a weapon with him. His capture became the effective endpoint of organized resistance in the fortress. By that time, out of approximately 7,000 to 9,000 members of the garrison, about 2,000 had been killed in action, and more than 5,000 had been taken prisoner. German losses amounted to around 1,000 to 1,200 killed and wounded, which, for a formation not planning a prolonged siege, was a significant figure. German documents and post-war memoirs of participants from the 45th Division repeatedly noted that the resistance at Brest had been unexpectedly fierce. Some officers wrote of stubbornness worthy of respect. The fortress, which was supposed to be a quick victory, became a symbol that the war on the Eastern Front would be harsh and bloody. Yet the story of the defense of the Brest Fortress is not limited to the Eastern Fort alone. Behind these events stood specific fates, specific people, and decisions made in conditions of total chaos. When the artillery strike fell upon the Brest Fortress at 3:58 a.m. on June 22, 1941, no one inside its walls knew that the defense would enter history as the defense of the Brest Fortress. It was not a Zarania-planned heroic operation. It was the chaos of the first minutes of war, in which specific individuals made decisions on which the lives of hundreds depended. Commissar Yefim Moiseyevich Fomin was in the fortress with units of the 84th Rifle Regiment. After the first explosions, he quickly realized that centralized command no longer existed. Communications had been destroyed. Officers were killed or cut off. Fomin began gathering soldiers in the casemates and inner courtyards of the citadel, organizing an all-around defense. He distributed ammunition, assigned men to sectors, and personally went to positions under fire. Survivors later recalled that Fomin maintained calm and firmness, even when German units were already inside the fortress. At the end of June, he was captured. As a political officer and as a Jew, he was executed on the spot by order of the German command. Captain Ivan Nikolaevich Zubachov assumed effective leadership of the defense in the central part of the fortress. He coordinated the actions of scattered groups and organized counterattacks. Under his command, the defenders repelled several German attempts to secure positions in the barracks. Zubachov was captured at the end of June after ammunition and the ability to continue resisting had been exhausted. Lieutenant Andrei Mitrofanovich Kishevatov, commander of the 9th Border Outpost, fought at the Terraspol fortification. His unit was among the first to come under attack. The border guards took up defense in shattered casemates and fought to the last. Kishevetov refused to leave his position, despite having the opportunity to withdraw. His family was inside the fortress. Later, they were executed by the occupiers. Kishevetov himself was killed in action. Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov became one of the symbols of the defense. He managed to hold the eastern fort for nearly a week under continuous fire from heavy artillery and aviatia. After the fortifications were destroyed, he continued resisting in underground chambers. His capture on July 23, 1941, marked the effective end of organized defense. German soldiers noted his extreme exhaustion and at the same time his determination. Later, after the war, Gavrilov was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Among the defenders were not only professional soldiers. Wives and children of officers were inside the fortress. Many of them were killed in the first hours of the artillery bombardment. Some women helped bandage the wounded and carry ammunition. Medical personnel worked in basements without light or water. It was a defense not only of a garrison, but of people trapped by war. German war diaries stated that the garrison displayed exceptional stubbornness. In post-war memoirs of division officers, there were references to the unexpected resilience of the Soviet soldiers. Although official propaganda of the time did not emphasize such assessments, personal notes and memoirs indicate that the defense of Brest made an impression even on the enemy. By the end of June, the main centers of resistance had been suppressed. However, isolated shots and skirmishes continued into July. A garrison of fewer than 9,000 men held its positions against superior forces for about a week in organized form and for nearly a month in the form of isolated pockets. The history of the defense is not only about dates and numbers. It is about specific decisions made by people who, finding themselves in complete isolation, continued to fight. They knew that help would not come. They understood that the fortress was surrounded. Yet there was no surrender. The Germans used engineer assault groups that advanced through the casemates with grenades and flamethrowers. In the narrow corridors, the distance between opponents was reduced to just a few meters. Any doorway could become a firing position. Soviet fighters, deprived of communication and unified command, operated in small groups of 5 to 10 men. They moved through internal passages, appeared suddenly, struck, and then withdrew deeper into the shattered fortifications. Particularly fierce fighting continued in the area of the Kobrin fortification and in the basements of the citadel. German units repeatedly reported that after the complete clearing of certain sectors, fire would resume. This meant that the defenders were using hidden passages and underground casemates that had remained since the 19th century. The water problem became catastrophic. The water supply system had been destroyed in the first minutes of the artillery bombardment. The approaches to the Bug River were under machine gun fire. Nevertheless, the fighters attempted to obtain water at night. Survivors later recalled that men crawled one by one, covering each other, and returned with a few canteens, enough for dozens of wounded. Many did not return. Ammunition was also running out. Fire was delivered in short bursts. Machine guns were used only during assaults. Grenades became the primary means of defense in confined spaces. When cartridges were gone, the fighting turned into hand-to-hand combat. German reports recorded cases of resistance to the last man in individual rooms. By June 27th, the main forces of the defenders had either been destroyed or captured. According to estimates, no more than a few hundred armed fighters remained in the fortress at that point. Yet even this number continued to tie down significant enemy forces. German units could not fully lift the blockade, fearing sudden attacks from the ruins. On June 29th, the eastern fort was subjected to a massive strike by heavy aviation. Bombs weighing up to 1,800 kilograms destroyed part of the fortifications. The explosions caused walls and ceilings to collapse. Losses among the remaining defenders were enormous. However, even after this, shots continued to ring out from individual casemates. By early July, the resistance had taken the form of isolated clashes. German patrols reported gunfire at night. The remaining fighters acted autonomously. They had no connection with the outside world and did not know that the front had already moved far to the east, that Minsk had been captured on June 28th. For them, the war continued within the boundaries of the ruined walls. By mid-July, individual pockets of resistance still existed. On July 23, 1941, Major Pyotr Gavrilov was captured. He was in severe condition, exhausted and wounded, but armed. His capture became the effective endpoint of the fighting inside the fortress. More than a month had passed since the first salvo at 3:58 a.m. on June 22nd. Organized defense had lasted about 7 days. Individual fighters continued to resist for nearly 30 days. The fortress, which was supposed to be taken within hours, had become a symbol of resilience. By early July 1941, active combat operations inside the Brest Fortress were officially considered concluded by the German command. However, reality differed from the reports. Despite the shattered walls, collapsed casemates, and the death of most of the defenders, individual armed fighters still remained inside the fortress. After the massive strikes on the eastern fort on June 29th, the main fortifications were destroyed. German units entered the ruins, capturing prisoners and eliminating the remaining groups. According to estimates, organized resistance had been suppressed by that point. Yet small groups and lone soldiers continued to hide in underground chambers and beneath the debris. German patrols regularly reported gunfire at night. Sometimes it was short bursts directed at passing units, at other times single rifle shots. Units were forced to maintain reinforced guards even after the official conclusion of the assault. This meant that the fortress was not fully under control. A special place in this story belongs to Major Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov. After the destruction of the eastern fort, he continued to hide in underground casemates with a small group. There was virtually no food. Water was obtained sporadically, from puddles and remaining reservoirs. The condition of the fighters worsened with each passing day. Nevertheless, the resistance continued. On July 23, 1941, Gavrilov was discovered by a German unit. According to German accounts, he was in severe condition, exhausted, wounded, yet armed. His capture became the symbolic endpoint of the fighting inside the fortress. More than 30 days had passed since the first artillery strike. From the original garrison, more than 5,000 men were taken prisoner. Many were captured within the first 24 hours when German units broke inside and cut off individual barracks. The prisoners underwent screening. Political officers, commissars, and Jews were separated. Commissar Yefim Moiseyevich Fomin was executed shortly after his capture. The same fate befell other political officers. Officers and enlisted men were sent to prisoner-of-war camps. Conditions of detention in 1941 were extremely harsh. According to research data, a significant portion of Soviet prisoners of war perished in the first months of the war from starvation, disease, and lack of medical care. Among the defenders of the fortress, many did not survive the winter of 1941. However, there were those who survived. Pyotr Mikhailovich Gavrilov went through the lagery, survived captivity, and returned after the war. His role in the defense was confirmed by research and by the testimonies of other participants. In 1957, he was awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. The fates of other defenders were established over decades. Historians collected memoirs and documents, comparing German war diaries with the accounts of survivors. Lieutenant Andrei Kizhevatov holds a special place in this story. He was killed in action, but his name became a symbol of the border guards who took the first blow. His family did not survive. These tragedies became part of the broader picture of the first days of the war. After the capture of the fortress, German units used its territory for military purposes. The ruined casemates became warehouses and strongpoints. Yet even weeks after the fighting had ended, German soldiers found inscriptions on the walls made by the defenders. The most famous of them read, "I am dying, but I do not surrender. Farewell, motherland." These words became a symbol of the entire defense. In the first months of the war, information about the events in the fortress was fragmentary. Only after the liberation of the territory in 1944 did systematic work begin to reconstruct the full picture of the battle. Inscriptions were discovered, testimonies were collected, and German documents were studied. In 1965, the fortress was awarded the title Hero Fortress. A memorial complex was created on its territory. The ruins were preserved as a reminder of the events of June 1941. In the summer of 1944, when Soviet troops liberated Brest during Operation Barbarossa, the Brest Fortress was a shattered, burned-out complex of walls and casemates. Many sections had been reduced to piles of brick. The traces of the fighting from June 1941 were everywhere: shell holes, charred ceilings, and collapsed underground passages. It was then that a new stage in the history of the defense began, the stage of reconstructing the facts. In the first post-war years, historians and military researchers began gathering materials. German war diaries of the 45th Infantry Division, interrogation records of prisoners, and the memoirs of surviving defenders were used. The work progressed slowly. Many participants had died in captivity. Documents had been lost in the chaos of the first months of the war. Gradually, the picture became clearer. Names, units, and the chronology of events were uteneni. The data on the size of the garrison, from 7,000 to 9,000 men, were confirmed. Information about German losses, around 1,000 to 1,200 killed and wounded, was compared and verified. It was established that organized defense had lasted about 7 days, while isolated pockets of resistance had existed until July 23, 1941. Special attention was given to the inscriptions found on the walls of the casemates. They became important sources. These short phrases, scratched into brick, confirmed the duration of the resistance. They recorded dates, names, and the emotional state of people who had found themselves in complete isolation. In the 1950s, the defense of Brest became widely known through publications and research. The stories of Major Pyotr Gavrilov, Commissar Yefim Fomin, and Lieutenant Andrei Kizhevatov received documentary confirmation. Witnesses were found who verified details of the final battles. The defense of the Brest Fortress is not a legend, but a confirmed historical fact of resistance by a garrison of fewer than 9,000 men against superior forces. It is an example of how an isolated unit, in the first hours of the largest invasion in history, managed to hold out for a week in organized form and for nearly a month in isolated pockets. The conclusion is clear. In military terms, the fortress was taken. On a strategic scale, the course of the campaign did not change, but in a moral dimension, the events of June 1941 demonstrated that the war on the Eastern Front would become a struggle at the limit of human endurance, where even surrounded and cut-off units would fight to the last. More than 30 days passed from the first salvo at 3:58 a.m. to the capture of the last defenders. Those days became part of history, not as an episode of defeat, but as an example of resilience and the fulfillment of military duty in conditions where the chances of survival were almost non-existent.